We will now get started for our regular City Council meeting. I'd like to welcome everyone to our meeting tonight. We will start. I assume that our person offering our prayer is not here. Is that right? He's coming from Arizona just to offer our prayer tonight, and he told us he might be running late, so we're going to allow him to say the prayer when he arrives. But he's not here yet, and so we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Gary Johnson.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much, Gary, and thanks for your work on the Community Service Council. He helps with the ham radio operation of our city for emergency preparedness and does a wonderful job to help us. Thank you. We will now move to our public comment period time. If you would like to make a comment, please come up, state your name, address, and keep your comments to 2 minutes, please, and we'll now open the public comment period.
Good evening. My name is James Keddington. I live at 3201 South, 75 East in Bountiful. I'm here to comment on the decision before the City Council on whether or not to appoint some land towards the building of a 50-meter pool at the South Davis Recreation Center. I know there's a few decisions whether to allot a small parcel or a larger parcel. I believe that doing the smaller parcel is short-sighted, as was the decision not to build a 50-meter pool when the rec center first opened up. The demands on the pool have been great for at least 12 years that I've been here in this community. It's overcrowded, the growth in aquatic sports, other uses, public demand. We just don't get enough pool time, pool space for anybody that needs it. I know that if you look online, historical conversations about the bubble are some of the most revered, and we need to bring back great pools back to Bountiful. People love our pools. And it's not just about sports. It's not just about competition. It's about building our young people. It's about building character. It's about developing them into great human beings. I know that right now some people think that we're waiting on the rec center to put this to bond before we make a decision, but the reality is they've done studies, they put together master plans, they've done surveys. We know the community wants this, and it's time for the City of Bountiful to put its support behind the rec center and the community before it goes to bond, and let them know that they've got the full support of Bountiful, because they already know they've got the support of all the other cities in the recreation district, and I'd like to see the City of Bountiful join that support vocally as well as officially. Thank you very much.
Any other comments tonight?
Hi, my name's Rachel Coleman, and I live on 1400 South, and I cannot stop shaking. I've been thinking a lot about how we have such beautiful and welcoming public places for our residents to gather and interact, like Main Street and Five Points, our schools and our parks. I've just found that the only problem is that our only option to safely get to these places is by driving. And some of our roads aren't even safe for driving. And I've just been thinking about why walk, why ride scooters, which I love to do, my family loves to do, skateboard, when you could easily drive everywhere, especially since the data shows that pedestrian safety has become what many call a public health crisis. If anyone's read the local newspapers or seen the news recently, then they know that these issues are very relevant. We as citizens and public officials need to be engaged and educated in how to best plan for the people that live here. We have a great opportunity with the construction of Washington Park to create pedestrian-friendly neighborhoods so that those that live within its vicinity and even further away can benefit from the park's amenities. My husband, kids, and I have walked to Washington Park several times recently and approached it from many different neighborhoods. Any way you walk or bike it from 500 West, 200 West, 500 South is really dangerous. These intersections and surrounding streets where neighborhoods connect should actually feel like a place where we can connect. These places should not only have design features that promote pedestrian and vehicle safety, but also create a meeting ground for social connectivity. I'd like to continue this conversation with members of the City Council, neighbors, and any other Bountiful residents who are interested in this issue. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? There is a family that emailed me that said they would like to discuss the issue of fires and the drought. So Brian and Mary King from Bountiful, they said that they would like to have the line for where fireworks are allowed reduced down to Orchard Drive or below. And they said that in light of the drought, they would hope that residents would enjoy the city fireworks, but not light their own this year. And I'm forwarding an email to the city council members from them regarding that as well. Any other comments from the public tonight? Okay, thank you so much for your involvement tonight. We will now move to, okay, thank you. We now have the person who's offering our prayer for us tonight, and you've driven here all the way from Arizona, is that correct? Wow, thank you so much. Will you please introduce yourself before you pray?
I would like to take a picture. We want to take it afterwards, before or after?
Okay, he came from Arizona, so he wants a quick picture. So do you mind just coming up here and then we'll just get around you, the city council? He has prayed in several different meetings, in several different settings across the U.S., and so we're just going to take a quick picture with him while he's here.
Perfect. That's my head.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. I took like 4.
Thank you so much, yes.
Sorry, I apologize.
Let me just make sure I got this title right. You are the president of the International Hinduism Society?
Yes, my name is Rajan Zed. I am the president of Universal Society of Hinduism. Yes, so thank you, Mayor Harris and the city manager for having me, despite I am being late, So I will start with Gayatri Mantra, which is the most sacred mantra of Hinduism. And then I shall be reading from ancient Hindu scriptures in Sanskrit, some of them as old as 1500 before the Common Era, then interpret in English. May all rise, please. Om Bhuvah Swaha Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Diyo Yona Prachodayat. We meditate on the transcendental glory of the Deity Supreme, who is inside the heart of the earth, inside the life of the sky, and inside the soul of the heaven. May He stimulate and illuminate our minds. Astoma Sadgamya, Tamsoma Jyotirgamya, Mrityor Mamratam Gamya. Lead us from the unreal to the real, lead us from darkness to light, lead us from death to immortality. Tasmada sakta statam karyam karma samachara asakto hyacharan karma parmapnoti purusha karma nevahi samsiddhi mastita jankadaya loka sangreha mevapi sampashankar tumrahasi. Strive constantly to serve the welfare of the world. By devotion to selfless, one attains the supreme goal of life. Do your work with the welfare of others always in mind. Om Saha Navavatu, Saha no Bhunaktu, Saha Viryan Karva Bahai, Tejasvi Navadita Mastu, Ma Vidvisa Bahai. May we be protected together, may we be nourished together, may we work together with great vigor, may our study be enlightening, may no obstacle arise between us. Samni va kuti samna hridyani va, samnamastu o mano yatha vasusa asti. United your resolve, united your hearts, may your spirits be at one that you may long together dwell in unity and concord. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Om. Thank you. Please be seated.
Thank you so much. That was really beautiful prayer. Thank you. We will now consider approval of the minutes for the 4 previous meetings.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We will now move to council reports. Council Member Bradshaw.
I do have a report tonight on the rec district and the discussions about the bond and property issues at the Bountiful City Park, the Fourth North Park. These were emailed over just before the start of our work session tonight, just as a refresher for the council and for the audience. The South Davis Rec District is a taxing entity, a taxing authority that is made up of the cities of Centerville, Bountiful, West Bountiful, Woods Cross, and North Salt Lake. There's about 100,000 residents between those cities that make up the South Davis Rec District, and the district has agreed to kind of act cooperatively in order to facilitate recreation facilities in the South Davis cities. This is what you're seeing on the screen is the current recreation facility. It has been in place for a number of years. It was built on land donated by the city of Bountiful. For long-timers, this is, fondly known as the site of the old Bountiful Bubble. And the ice rink that was there, and when the ideas were put forth to create this joint recreation district, this was the new facility that everyone agreed to bond and pay for using our property tax dollars. For the past few years, there have been some plans that have been proposed to remodel this facility and potentially expand this facility, to build a second location, which at this point is anticipated to be in North Salt Lake at Hatch Park, and then to acquire land that is to be determined but likely to be west of I-15 for field space. This has been a project that the Rec District Board had worked on probably since starting in about 2019 up till the current time. As you are aware, I took over serving as Bountiful's representative to this board in January of 2022. So a lot of those prior plans and discussions took place before I joined the board, and our designee at that time was our prior mayor. So I have spent the last few months making sure that I was up to speed, asking a lot of questions and understanding the process that has been gone through to get to the point of the plans. The estimated costs for the remodel of the existing facility are targeted at about $21.6 million. This is the remodel and the expansion. A new second facility, which would have many of the same amenities and features as this facility, in which I've shown you in prior council reports, is estimated to be about a $25 million cost. There is a benefit there in not having to pay for the land acquisition costs because the property would be donated by the city of North Salt Lake out of one of their existing parks, Hatch Park. And then kind of a ballpark estimate of potentially $6 million to acquire the to-be-determined land for additional field space somewhere west of I-15. So if you're keeping track, that's looking like roughly a $45 million bond for this combined kind of three-part project. The discussions we've had in the past as this package of ideas was kind of roughly discussed in 2020 and 2021 is that the rec district would like to build a new pool facility as part of that expansion and remodel process. And in order to do so, they would like to expand outward into Bountiful City Park that is there on 400 North. Gary and I had the opportunity last night to meet with the rec district staff and some others on the board to see the property with taped off so that you could walk it and see it from all aspects. And I took some pictures that maybe we'll look at if we need to in a minute. You can see this orange space is the latest idea. There has been the original proposed idea that kind of flipped that orange box 90 degrees, where it poked a lot more into the 4th North Park. Since then, there have been 4 other potential pool orientation options that have been considered, some that overlapped the existing pirate ship space, kind of scooted it in different directions, and one that included an idea of expanding the existing 40-meter pool to make it a 50-meter pool and then adding a 25-meter pool outside. So those are different concepts that have come about. This particular orientation would be a sprung structure, so it would sort of have like a kind of a canopied tent-like appearance, a permanent year-round tent appearance. I think our estimate was that it would be about 40 feet high in this sprung canopied structure that would exist. There is not a train, as far as I know, coming to the rec facility, but it's possible. As you can see in this picture, the thing that is fairly impacted by this request for an additional land donation above and beyond the land that Bountiful City has already donated to this to the rec district is the picnic pavilion, which is one of our largest picnic pavilions. This pavilion also houses the only bathrooms for this park, and it also has the hot and cold water features that are needed for the groups that are doing food handler events at the park. The health department won't give them a food handler permit for different things like the car show or the handcart days, breakfast cook-off, things like that, without access to hot water. And so that pavilion, the little part that kind of bumps out to the west, houses the bathrooms and that important kind of kitchen access facility. So these are a couple of ideas that we can ask Miranda to scroll through of if the rec district was to expand, if we were to donate the space, where the pavilion might be moved, and of course the important restroom functions and those heated functions maintained for the park. And Miranda, if you wouldn't mind, are you controlling our computer functions? You can see that there's kind of three new options that the architect that the rec district is working with has provided to try and maintain the overall size of the covered space of the picnic pavilion and the bathroom and hot and cold water functions. The rec district is, because they have a single mission as their entity, a single goal as their mission, which is to provide recreation facilities. For many of the board members, I think this is looked at as, purely through that one lens of what is the benefit to the recreation district, and the pros and cons are kind of only related to that question. We, have a dual, I think, duty to look at this issue. One, as all residents and taxpayers of the recreation district, but as the stewards of the city in the impact to our recreation space. As we're all aware, we spent a significant amount of money, the residents' money, acquiring additional park space because we felt we had a deficit in recreation spaces here in Bountiful. And so the question becomes, would this potential donation of this land in order to orient the pool in this way versus any other way, would that be acceptable, or would its impacts on our park be a reason not to do this or to ask them to consider some other alternate plan? As Gary and I were at the park last night doing the walkthrough, there were lots of questions asked about the use of that facility, how often it's used, why it's positioned there, how the community uses it, things like that. And it was a lovely evening last night. There happened to be a family, a group that had reserved the pavilion and were having a large party at the pavilion. There were people actively using the park. There was someone using the concert stage. There were people throwing the ball around. And so I think there is obviously the consideration for us of our just general needs for open space, and in particular something that's not a field that will be taken over by someone that has a scheduled soccer game or lacrosse game. But then there's also the considerations of those big community events that I think are important to our community, where we bring in a lot of cars for the car show, for instance, that pack that open space and that need that access point between the play space and the pavilion in order to bring all those cars in. We talked about the times that a refrigerated truck is sometimes brought into this park, and that it has to travel through the corridor between the playground and the pavilion. And so maintaining that access point being an important consideration, and you can see that the architect from the rec district has tried to bring that in. In some of these designs, you see still that the pavilion, the picnic pavilion, would kind of nestle right against that pool structure. There may be pros to that. There may be cons to it. Part of the beauty of the picnic pavilion is that it is open on three sides. You've got, sight lines to kids playing at the playground and easy access to the parking lot. And whether any of those things are impeded would be something I'd submit to all of you guys to think about and analyze. Miranda, is it possible to switch over? Because sometimes it's helpful to have a view of the pictures from standing in the space. So you can see I've tried to take pictures from kind of the far edges of where we had taped off where the pool would be. So this is at that farther edge, looking back west toward the existing pool facilities. Here I'm standing, they would apparently need emergency access, so this little road, this little stubbed access alley road would need to remain. So this is kind of the far edge looking back at that pavilion, the far northern edge of kind of the boundary. And here we are inside the existing rec district space, looking back up at the pavilion. This would be the far kind of western edge of where that particular pool design is envisioned. I think that might be the extent of my pictures. Oh, here we're looking, back from the southern side looking east to try and give you a sense of scale. The pavilion does sit on a little bit of a rise in the park. I don't know that that's important. Maybe Gary has had time to talk to the park staff about why it sits on the little rise it does. So that is a kind of an important question about these different orientations that have been discussed and drawn out, and how the 50-meter pool may or may not fit on the existing facility. There is, I think, a whole separate discussion and issue before the city, which is, lending whole city support or individual support from an elected capacity, to support the $45 million bond package. I think there are probably independent asks that ought to be considered independently. At this point, the best estimate that I have is that the Rec District Board anticipates gathering more information, having more information to report potentially about these land acquisitions on the west side of I-15, additional kind of tightening of cost estimates due to inflation and construction costs, things like that, in the June board meeting, with a potential vote to forward a bond to the public. And again, it would be, as we've experienced with our Parks and Trails bond, it would be up to the public to decide. It is just a vote to forward it or not, in possibly at the July Rec District Board meeting or the August meeting, in order to meet the deadlines for the county clerk to have the question appear on the ballot. It seems to me that, Bountiful's concern that we were the only city donating land was a major driver, and the mayor of North Salt Lake has said as much in some of our Rec District Board meetings, a major driver in North Salt Lake stepping forward with a donation that takes, quite frankly, about $6 million of cost out of this bond. If there had to be an effort to acquire land for a second facility, it would probably increase the bond cost by $6 million. So the questions that have been raised about why other cities haven't stepped up with land donations, I think likely made that initial rec district proposal in 2020 and 2021 better and tighter because of that donation from North Salt Lake. And so that's, I guess, the question I would send back to you. I know that all of you had questions and asked for more information in one of our last work sessions that Gary has provided, and I have provided some updates as well from the last Rec District Board meeting to all of you. Gary, have I missed any important considerations or updates that you think ought to be shared from our walkabout yesterday?
It was very helpful to be on site and to consider the impact, not necessarily of space, that's important, but what the space that would be taken away by moving the pavilion and how to minimize that if that's a desire. So I think a site visit is worth it. I can't think of anything else to add, Kate.
May I?
I'm happy to take any questions
May I ask
that
a
I can
question
answer now, or I'm happy to take any requests for informations back as the liaison to the rec district.
I just have two questions. With the new pavilion, or the new layout of the pool in this tent, would they put bleachers in that? Are bleachers intended for that pool?
I understand, yes, because it would be intended as a competition
Okay.
pool. And so there would be some amount of kind of stadium-ish mini seating because of its intended use for
Okay.
competitions.
And then my second question, where is the conversation with the school district and supplementing costs on their end. I know that was one of our
Yes.
one of our asks.
Yeah, so this facility is currently hosting 4 high school swim teams. The 3 high schools that are in the recreation district and Farmington High, which is outside of the recreation district. The district at this point has agreed to contribute $6 million one time towards the construction of pool facilities. They have not at this point agreed to contribute any ongoing O&M towards any of the pool facilities.
No
I would-
maintenance.
I would like for those discussions to take place, quite frankly, that the O&M be something that the district considers, since they are significant users of the pool space for the high school teams. But for this facility, they would need to build pools at each of the high schools. But I am not the rec district board chair, nor the executive director, and so I am not charged with those discussions, though I do hope they happen.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, may I ask a question? Okay, so I really appreciate all of this visual information. It's super helpful. And
I was
think-
channeling you and your charts this morning.
Awesome. Anyway, so question, I think what we're trying to get at is this the best possible use of this land for the city and for residents of Bountiful? And, considering those 2 asks, and maybe you addressed this, but I just didn't hear it. With regard to the new pavilion, who will bear the cost of building the new pavilion? Will that be built into the bond? Is that something that an additional cost that will fall on Bountiful?
So it would be a cost of the rec district, and it would be a cost that would be built into the bond. So all the residents of the rec district would bear some fractional responsibility for building a new pavilion. I think at least the representations I've made and that Gary has made is that we'd want a pavilion of a similar size. This is probably one of our larger park pavilions, one of a handful, probably not even a handful, probably a handful of very large pavilions that we have in our portfolio of picnic pavilions. And so to not replace it at the same size is probably something we wouldn't consider. And so that cost would be built in and included in the bond.
Just a really quick follow-up question. The orientations and I would agree that it is a unique and really important pavilion in the city, and I think that it would need to be rebuilt at the same level of amenity and size and quality. The orientation seemed somewhat, I don't know, wonky, and is that because they're trying to preserve the trees that are near
So
there, or what?
Miranda,
is
can you
the-
go, maybe this is the best tree. So see that lovely tree that's like off the corner? Oh, yeah, right there. See that tree? The windstorm did away with that tree. It is no longer there, but it is there on Google Earth, forever preserved. I would agree with you that the layout feels a little bit squished. It feels like it's a little tight to the building, because if you imagine that one edge of that is going to be next to kind of a 40-foot structure. One other thing that I kind of noted during our tour is at Creekside Park, there is a large picnic pavilion, and it is located really close to the play facility. And because it provides shade and a spot to set down your lunch or your toys or your jackets or whatever, the pavilion was often used by people who had not reserved it. A party would show up and had reserved it for a birthday or a family picnic, only to find that other residents had just kind of taken it over because it was so conveniently close to the playground. And so eventually it was actually taken out of the reservable rotation because it was just too close to feel like we could confidently rent it to a party. So there was some discussion about should the big pavilion be closer to the playground. I think the considerations are what I've just mentioned about, does that change the nature of its reservability for residents that want to host a larger type of family-style event? And then the second would be it blocking that important access to get cars and refrigerated trucks and tents and other things like that to the center of the park, that is the main access point to get, from the parking lot into that space, that trying to enter through the trees or from the busyness of 400 North is not feasible. So that was a long answer to partial wonkiness of layout.
Can I ask a couple additional questions? Is this intended to be year-round?
The 50-meter pool, because it's covered, would be a year-round pool.
And would it be connected to the building? This diagram looks like it, maybe you walk outside to get there, or?
So see where the existing kind of bigger pop-up blue tent is? That is kind of in that, right there, yes. Miranda's just reading my mind on where to put her cursor. So it's envisioned that kind of in that area would be 2 new locker rooms that would be constructed, a girls' and a boys' locker room for the teams. While apparently the trend is to move to family change rooms for most of the rec district facility, high school team sports, of course, are going to still need locker rooms that are designated for girls and boys to change in versus the family-style facility that is what other patrons would want if you were bringing all your kids to go swim and change into their swimsuits. So in that space would be kind of a hallway with 2 little locker rooms.
Thank you. And the other maybe observation or concern is we know that, as we just saw, the pavilion is elevated. And so either the new pool needs to be elevated to match that, or it needs to be dug in the ground, and then we have a retaining wall around there of sorts. There just seems to be a big grade change between the existing pool and where the rec and where the pavilion is. That obviously can be hampered, but that would just further impact our park. And it's a park that almost all of our large gatherings are. We don't have a park this big or this focused for all of our activities. And I recognize the need for the rec center to have it, and I respect that, and I see the benefit. But I do have reservations for, that we should compromise all of our uses of this park, or majority of them, for this. Could this extension to the rec center be on any other side of the building?
My understanding, and again, my knowledge depth on the board is only a few months deep, that there are constraints on the other sides. For instance, the school district on the east. Thank you. I was trying to figure out where the mountains were in this picture. To the east, that the school district has been unwilling to give up space on that side.
How come? Why would they not want to give up space?
They do have fields right now.
I recognize, but
It's an interesting question that one political entity is being asked and somewhat pressured to give up space, and that a different political entity is not receiving that same type of ask or pressure. But for whatever the reason, an ask at some point was made, and the answer was no. And I don't know that I have a depth of board knowledge and past planning to go deeper than that. I'm happy, though, to take that back as a question you'd like to have a better answer to.
If we're placed on the east, I recognize they need to redo the road a little bit, but it seems like it'd have less impact on the site as a whole, as I look at it. And where grass is actively used, I think they're putting it in a pretty high-profile spot.
So I'm happy to take that question back about the east side and whether there were more fruitful discussions that could have been had with the school district. I don't know, unless Gary, unless your deeper knowledge base lends you to a better answer.
Any other questions for Kate?
Yeah, I've got one if I could.
Please.
First of all, I'll say that it looks like that pool could fit perfectly in the space that the school's gyms are sitting right now. So I think the city owns that property. Perhaps we swing that pool 90 degrees and move it to the northwest. In his comments tonight, Mr. Keddington, I think it was, said all other participating cities have already approved the 50-meter pool and only Bountiful remains to get on board. Have other city councils voted to support a bond that hasn't even been voted on to put on the ballot yet?
Not to my knowledge, and I'm going to guess that the offering of a bond is a not very frequent thing that happens, and so I'm going to just suppose that residents might not be completely familiar with that process of how that works, or maybe something was lost in communications that he had received with the rec district or others that he's communicating with. The formal process that would have to be engaged in is that the rec district board would have to conduct a public hearing about the issuance of a bond. And the public would have the opportunity to weigh in, and then the board would vote to forward that bond. It triggers a process that we're familiar with where you have an opportunity for both sides to present different arguments in a hearing. There's an informational brochure that can be sent to the voters in that district, but that formal process hasn't been triggered because the board at this point has not voted to recommend a bond and forward it.
Thanks. One other thing, I really don't like the alignment that's been presented tonight, in part because it not only occupies a lot of property that the city uses fairly heavily right now, it isolates a pretty sizable piece of property on the northwest corner that will now be unusable as well, and will just be an artifact of some previous use, or I guess it could be rededicated to something else. So I think some of the other alignments are more sensitive to our needs and protect our residents' interests better. But I really appreciate the detailed report, sincerely. And in all sincerity, I recognize the blessing that the rec center is in Bountiful. We're lucky to have it here. And I really do want to have a new 50-meter pool here. But I want to have it built so that our residents are respected and our donations are also recognized. Thanks.
Any other questions for Councilwoman Bradshaw? All right, council reports. Councilmember Higginson?
I think I've droned on long enough for tonight. Whatever I have, I'll save it for later. Thanks.
Councilmember Segura Bar?
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Councilmember Price Hewish?
Just a couple of things with regard to the Bountiful Davis Art Center. I would encourage people to take advantage of the wonderful Music Fest that is taking place right now. It's a 3-concert series. There are 2 left, and these concerts are selling out, and they are really amazing. So July 14th and October 13th will be the next concerts, but more immediately is Summerfest, and that will begin in June. And that will be food, art, music, all of the things that we've all grown to love over the years for Summerfest. It will be every Monday in June from 6:30 to 9 in the Bountiful Town Square. So those are the main things from Bountiful Davis Art Center.
Thank you so much. I will just report briefly. I had a South Davis Seward District meeting this week, and they will now be accepting credit card payments at the Seward District. Also, they just recently voted to enter into an interlocal agreement with the redevelopment agency of Centerville for a community reinvestment project for Power Sports Mall along the Centerville Frontage Road. So that's something you can be looking forward to seeing. And it was interesting coming from the sewer district entity for to participate in that. Also, I attended the fire district board meeting, and just as a report back to you, they're not planning on a property tax increase this year, but they are increasing the member city assessment by around 7% for our city, which was something that we were planning on and had agreed to. They also have 3 new graduate recruits that will be firefighters, so that's exciting for the fire department. Councilmember Bell.
Mentioned it last time, but just, we have the Concerts in the Park series out and available, and I hope that you will come and participate in that this summer. And there is the Memorial Day program at Veterans Park this Monday, Memorial Day, at 11 o'clock.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those reports. We will now consider approval of expenditures greater than $1,000.
Move to approve those expenditures as printed.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. Thank you so much. And now it's my pleasure to recognize Mr. Milo Paskett. And he is here with his wife, I presume? Yes. Milo, thank you so much for your service. Milo is there standing. And Milo, would you mind coming up here to the microphone? And Brian, if you would accompany him. Brian Potts is the director of the Bountiful Community Service Council. And I just wanted to ask Brian if he might be willing to say a few words about Milo.
Say a few words. That's all I should say. It's with sorry. It is with great respect and admiration that we are required to accept the resignation of Milo from the Bountiful Community Service Council after 16 years of wonderful service to our community and to our council. He's been a wonderful example of the volunteer spirit that lives here in Bountiful, and he's put in countless hours. And I am personally grateful for all he's done for me to help me to grow into helping the Community Service Council be all it can. He's just a wonderful man, and we will miss seeing him monthly, but hopefully we will see him more often than we think at this time.
I'm afraid I've aged out. I'm getting a little older. When I first went on the council, Richard Higginson was on the council in his other term and was advisor, so he remembers how far back that goes.
Indeed.
It's been great to associate with all the people on the committee and broaden my acquaintance, and I'm thankful. I just have to drop out though now, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve.
Well,
Mayor, can I make one brief comment?
yes, please.
Milo doesn't want the spotlight ever, and I'm sure he's uncomfortable right now. But it's awesome to be involved with a good organization like the Community Service Council, but it's also awesome to have rubbed shoulders with just really good people like you, Milo.
There have been a lot.
There have been a ton of them. Thanks for being one of those. You're a good person.
Since I'm tired, I'm going to take the rest of the meeting off, though. So,
Oh, please, please do, Milo. I just want to echo what's been said, and Brian told me that you are an original member of the Bountiful Community Service Council.
I'm not sure that's correct.
Okay, well, 16 years. That's pretty.
I was appointed by a former member to come.
Well, 16 years is quite a long tenure of service, and I also heard that you've been the archivist. I know in the 8 years I've been on the council, I've been receiving minutes from you. So you've been doing that. You've been you've kept distributions list up to date. You've maintained the channels of communication. You've run the box office during the Christmas concerts. You've done a lot, Milo, and we really appreciate it. So
Not as much as Richard.
Richard and Brian have helped tremendously, but
Or
tonight.
Gary.
Yeah, tonight we're here to honor you, Milo. So thank you so much for your service. Let's give Milo a hand.
know, seriously. That's his attitude.
Thank you so much. Really nice to have opportunities to honor people who have given so much to our community. We will now move to consider approval of Ordinance 2022-04, adopting a transient room tax. We'll turn the time over to Galen Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. Before you tonight is a consideration of adopting a 1% municipal transient room tax that is allowed in state law. And it is for a tax on accommodations at hotels, motels, and similar accommodations that are of 30 consecutive days or less. And the tax can be enacted after steps that are called out in Title 5912-3A and related code sections of state code. And it can be taken place after the governing body has had a consideration of enacting the tax and then making provisions for a public hearing. And then if that's approved, there's an ordinance that approves that. And then the tax commission is notified to begin collecting the tax. On March 22nd and again on April 12th of this year, the City Council considered this tax and then directed staff to research it further and then provide an ordinance on adopting a municipal transient room tax, which is before you tonight. In the staff report, there is a calendar of actions which we're at the point now where we are bringing it before the council to consider the adoption of the ordinance. After there's been a public notice posted since May 9th in several public locations, as well as the public notice website, our own website and other locations. And so I present that for your consideration of approval, and be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. Council, what questions do you have?
I just want to thank Galen for taking the mystery out of the process with your timeline. That's amazing.
Thank you.
And I'd make a motion, except we need to have a public hearing, and so I'll hold off until then.
Any other questions before we go to the public hearing? Okay, we will now open a public hearing to hear anyone who would like to speak about the proposed transient room tax of 1% on short-term rentals. Is there anyone that would wish to speak? Okay, we will close the public hearing and bring it back to the council. Any other questions that you have, council?
Mayor, I'd be happy to make a motion that we adopt Ordinance 2022-04, enacting a municipal transient room tax for Bountiful City.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you. We will now move to the next item, where we will consider approval of the Super Parameters Resolution 2022-07. Mr. Galen Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. You have a staff report before you that will detail out why we are here tonight. In November of 2020, the voters approved issuance of up to $8 million in par value of general obligation bonds for the purpose of doing work at the former Washington Elementary School property to develop it into a recreational type facility, and then also for the production of a citywide trail system. Market conditions and plans for the project are now to the point where issuance of bonds is warranted, and so to that end, we have been working with professionals that have been helping us to structure the bond and also the project itself. In terms of the bond issuance, Lewis, Young, Robertson, and Birmingham has been selected as municipal advisor, and they've been instrumental in helping us to get to this point. And also our bond counsel, which is Farnsworth Johnson, and I believe that Brandon Johnson may be here tonight. he is here. Okay, great. He was going to try to make the trek, and he made it on time, so that's great. One of the first key steps in order to issue the bonds is to do a what is called a parameters resolution, or in our case tonight, a super parameters resolution that provides a little bit broader one step towards getting the process taken care of, and it delegates authority to certain individuals to facilitate the process, and gives the upper and lower limits of certain things, how much the bond could be issued for, the interest rates that are specified and that type of thing. So those kind of things are called out. But for some background, in the staff report provided from Lewis Young, a couple of things that are helpful for background for the council and for the public as well. There's a pro forma debt service calculation that was issued, and then a property tax impact analysis. And so I just point you to that for background if you had not had a chance to take a look at that. Just as an item of note, I spoke with Jason Birmingham, who's our municipal advisor, a couple of hours ago, and he indicated that the pro forma that was put together with the interest rates, because of market conditions today, and we'll find out if that holds by the time we get to the point of issuing bonds, was actually favorable over the past couple of days. And so the interest rate, if we were to issue today, would be up to 25 basis points lower than what we're showing now, which is 0.25%. And that makes a big difference when you're issuing $8 million. And so we'll hope that that holds. But for now, that's a good bit of good news. The super parameters resolution for City Council action tonight, I've specified out some of those parameters. It is a rather large document, but it in essence authorizes the issuance of the $8 million in principal amount of the general obligation bonds as was voted upon in November of 2020, and then a number of other things that go through, amongst which are designating a officer which would be authorized to exercise and reject bids for the purchase of bonds, to approve the final principal amount, maturity amounts, interest dates, rates of maturity, and so forth that would go along with the bond issuance. And that would be in this super parameters resolution, the city manager. And then it calls out who our bond counsel is, which is Farnsworth Johnson, our municipal advisor, Lewis Young, Robertson, Birmingham. And then we would ultimately recommend designation of a paying agent and bond registrar as a part of the process of delegating the authority to the city manager to go through that process. And then a number of other things that, in the interest of time, I could go through if you would like. But one thing I would like to mention is we did have some, since the date of this staff report and the super parameters that we distributed to you, we did have some further comment from the municipal advisor. And so the copy of the resolution that's on your desk is the most recent one. And so it includes some comments from our municipal advisor that we thought were advisable to include. And there are a couple of exhibits that go along with that resolution that are mentioned. That one that talks about the delegation of authority, and it has a few things in it that we need to work out with the financial advisor on interest payment dates and a few things that are housekeeping items that way. And then there's a continuing disclosure undertaking where you have to say, as the issuer, that you'll annually provide information that updates the public and the bondholders on the financial condition, and some forward-looking statements that each issuer has to declare annually. And so there's a couple of things in there that we just need to discuss and formalize before that is all one package that you can act upon. But just wanted to make you aware of those things. The resolution that's before you tonight does have the things that our financial advisor thought were pertinent to mention, and they're mostly housekeeping related. A couple of strikeouts for some title changes in individuals, and then some of the things that are related to selection of the paying agent and things like that that we can take care of later that would be part of that designation of authority. So be glad to answer any questions you have that way. And also Mr. Johnson is here and can answer more detailed questions than I certainly can, because since he wrote it. So
Excellent, thank you. What questions do you have, Council?
If I may, quick question. After we, if we pass this tonight, then this super parameters resolution, when do you anticipate the actual issuance of the bond to take place?
It would be in June, and so what's that? Yeah, I didn't bring the actual timetable with me, but yeah, in June area, end of June.
And just follow-up question. From the initial or original property tax analysis and the costs to residents, initial, again, cost analysis and projections from 2020, could you just speak to if there are any negative or positive impacts to residents and monthly or annual payments?
In terms of what was advertised at the beginning, I'm not certain, maybe Gary could help me with on that, but in the item that I was given from Lewis Young that I provided to you, that's an impact, on the average resident, for a residential property, the monthly impact is $3.20 or annually $38.35. And for a business which is taxed at full taxable value, that was $1.17 or $14.03 per 100,000 of taxable value. So you have to kind of mark that up to whatever the business is worth. Is that what you're asking?
I was just wondering what the original projections were, but it seems in my mind that it was in the $34, $35 range. So it's pretty nominal and fairly close, I think, but maybe I'm wrong too.
I think you're
Does
right.
anyone remember that?
Yes, I apologize, don't have those numbers, but it was in the $33, $34 range, if I remember right.
No, some people had expressed concern about the timing of the bond issuance and the unfortunate, increase in interest rates. So this is actually good to see that it's not really significantly higher.
And if rates continue like they have been over the past couple of days, it could be very positive for if the interest rates continue to drop in our favor. But we'll have to see where that ends. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Galen.
Yep.
Any other questions?
I was just gonna say, that makes me feel all this pressure, like we should lock in our mortgage right now. I'm prepared to make a motion unless there's more questions.
I have a couple questions
Then
if
I
I
will hold
can.
off.
So, and it's just because I'm unfamiliar with the process. So as I read this, I had some questions, if I can ask these quickly. How did the city hire Lewis Young to do this? How did that process come about?
We issued an RFP to financial advisors that we were aware of in the area. I believe we had 4 that we issued it to, and 2 responded.
Okay. And when was that?
Several months, 6 months or more ago.
Yeah, it seems like it was about 6 months we made the selection.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what's the on page 61, you mentioned U.S. Bank would be the paying agent and bond register. What is that role, and what's the significance of that?
It may or may not be U.S. Bank. We have an existing relationship on our other issuances from the past with them, and they are our current city bank. But there are others that could provide that, so that's something that will be determined as part of the delegation of authority. And the role of a paying agent and registrar is the registrar accounts for all the bonds. They'll be issued in $5,000 increments. So they account for all those and register those. And then when a bondholder sells or buys, they have to keep track of who owns it, that type of thing. And then they're a dispersing agent as well. So they're dispersing the bond funds as they come in, that type of thing.
Couple more. Is there early payment penalties?
I'm not sure on the early payment penalty. I know we can early redeem it for 100% of par, I believe, at certain dates. We haven't structured the issue yet, so it's going to be hard to say on that. It's allowed in the super parameters, I believe.
That's one of the provisions that's delegated. Typically in a bond like this, there's a 10-year no call or no early redemption period, so, which is very almost universal for municipal bonds. It can be different than that, and that's one of the things that will be determined when the bonds are priced. But like I said, typically it's a 10-year period. After those 10 years, then you can pay them off early, usually at no penalty. So it's at whatever the par amount or the principal amount is.
And so after 10 years, maybe we could either pay it off in full or refinance it to a better interest rate?
That's exactly right, yep.
And are there fees associated with issuing a bond, or are those worked into the cost of the bond itself?
So typically the fees are paid from the proceeds of the bonds, but yeah, there's our fee, the fee of Lewis Young, the paying agent fee. Those are the typical fees, but those are usually included in the bond issuance paid from bond proceeds.
Okay. And then I think my last question, it looks like on the amortization, it looks like the interest rate changes. Is it a variable rate or?
Yes, well.
That's a structuring that the municipal advisor puts together to say how would these be marketed, what potential purchases are out there, and what would they be looking for, like say a pension fund that might buy and say, I need to have maturities out in a certain time, what kind of interest rate would they be looking for, and they try to market it based on that. And I don't know if you have.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. When the bonds are priced, the interest rate will be fixed, so it won't be a variable interest rate. Each year of maturity, there may be a different interest rate. As Galen said, they're, different. Well, the further out it goes, each maturity usually gets a little bit higher interest rate. But when you price the bonds, those interest rates are fixed. So it won't vary once you price the bonds. You'll know what your annual payments are from the date that the bonds are priced and issued.
Okay, thank you.
Great questions. Any others?
If there's no other questions, I'd love to make a motion to approve the Super Parameters Resolution 2022-07 to facilitate the next steps in our general obligation bond.
I second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you so much. We will now consider approval of the final architecture and site plan review of the proposed expansion at St. Olaf's School. Mr. Astorga.
Thank you. This is an expansion to their private school located at 1793 South Orchard Drive, consisting of approximately 14,000 square feet. The City Council looked at this back in August of 2019. I think 3 of you should remember this one. The applicant was unable to submit for a specific building permit for the addition and within the required 1-year vested date that is outlined in the land use code. Most of the site improvements have already been completed, such as the emergency access, the wraparound driveway around the area, and most of the landscaping have already been taken care of. And the applicant at this time wants to build as soon as possible to get that addition going. I'll be more than happy to answer any additional questions. We simply recommend that council approve the final architecture and site plan review for St. Olaf School.
Francisco, at the initial approval, there was going to be remodeling in the basement of the existing building. Did that also get done?
I don't believe so, as we haven't seen any permits for it.
Super. I'd be happy to make a motion if there are no other questions that we grant final architectural and site plan approval for the St. Olaf's addition.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Forgot to vote.
Okay, we will now consider approval of Ordinance 2022-05, prohibiting the discharge of fireworks east of 400 East and Orchard Drive. Mr. Drake.
Thank you, Mayor. This is an ordinance that we see every spring. State law requires us to evaluate the present and historical fire dangers and conditions in the city and then make appropriate changes. We've consulted with our fire chief, who is here today, if you would like to discuss anything with him. And he has indicated that he recommends the same limitations as last year. For the public's benefit, I'll just say that it's starting from the Centerville border, east of 400 east from Pages Lane to 500 south, and then east of Orchard Drive from 500 south to the North Salt Lake border. Pretty simple to understand those parameters. And then just anywhere that it's prohibited specifically by the South Davis Metro Fire Agency officials. This is the same ordinance that you approved last year with literally one change in a number. Instead of it saying 2022, it now says 2023.
I have two questions I wonder if I could ask. Had a resident ask the question of having this ordinance expire on January 1st, which would mean that somebody who lived east of Orchard or 400 East could not light off fireworks on New Year's Eve. And I would be curious if our fire chief has any concerns that mean that this resolution ought to extend into the winter fire season, if you still believe that that is necessary, or how you feel about celebrating New Year's Eve with fireworks.
I have no issues with that whatsoever, Councilmember Bradshaw. Obviously, the state allows you to light fireworks off New Year's Eve. That is in the parameters, but I don't have any concerns with lighting them off in January, December. So if it ends prior to that, I'm fine with it. I believe Gary and I spoke that it's not a concern for me. So
I don't have a motion necessarily this time, but I have a second question. Last year, some cities sought to ban fireworks in their entire jurisdiction. Since we find the drought is worse and our watering restrictions are even more enhanced, for either you, Chief, or for our city attorney, I'm certain we'll get questions from our residents about whether this is enough, or whether we are allowed under state law to consider a full ban, or whether that takes some additional action by some other higher power.
The way I interpret the law, the code, is that we cannot ban throughout the whole city. I know Salt Lake City and Ogden City did last year ban them throughout the whole city. There was a lot of discussion through some of the firework companies that they were going to look at litigation for that. That is again this year, that they are looking to do that again. But I do not read the code and or interpret the code that we can ban them throughout the city. So I would feel that any city, if they did that, would be subject to litigation. So, and I don't feel, I feel comfortable with the parameters that we've set down. I think dropping them down to Orchard Drive as we have in Bountiful, and it gives the police the opportunity to figure that line out and police that line. And then it's consistent with North Salt Lake coming in on Orchard Drive as well. We have some historical canyons, or some, not historical, but we have some canyons that come down past Davis Boulevard. So I believe that it's a safer route to go. So.
Thank you. My other request would just be, I anticipate that as we get closer to our July holidays, that we will get that question from residents. Why can't the city ban fireworks? And I would love some citations from our city attorney that we might have handy.
I'm happy to give that to you.
Answer those questions, because I am anticipating that
I can give it to you now, or I can email it to you.
I would love it in an email format
Yeah.
that I can access closer to July.
I'll send it to you. There's no doubt you will get comments both sides, that you have done too much and you have done not enough. So you'll definitely get that. I suspect you'll get that with water as well. And just to give you an idea of what it is it's based on existing and historical hazardous environmental conditions. The way that we looked at that last year was looking at that there was concern about I'm not sure the best term for them, the draws that come down out of the canyons, and they basically kind of end at Orchard, and that's kind of where the risk is eliminated. But there is concern for all of the draws that extend out of the various canyons in Bountiful, that if any of those are to catch fire, that could be a very dangerous thing. Just a reminder too, Gary just reminded me that last year, and we've discussed this as a management staff, last year we offered the parking lot out here as a safe place to light fireworks and enjoy fireworks, and we plan to do the same again this year. That will be available to citizens too, and we'll make sure to put that on our social media channels and make sure citizens, newsletters, things like that they're aware. And then just with regard to the January 1 date, yeah, I don't remember why we changed that. It used to say until it was amended or rescinded by the council. I think we ended up doing that because we're required to reevaluate that each year, and it was just a good place to look at it and say, okay, January 1 is where it ends, and then in the spring, as the summer starts up, is when we reevaluate it. Based on what the chief said, if that is something that could simply be amended here tonight, if you'd like. I would note that you might not be able to light off fireworks on Christmas Eve, but you could 1 second later on New Year's Day.
It's true. Great point.
You say Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve?
Or sorry, not Christmas, New Year's Eve. You can't do it on
It's a
Christmas Eve
long
either.
holiday. You celebrate it differently than I do.
Sorry. It's no wonder you were looking at me like, what is he saying? New Year's Eve.
Yes, correct.
11:59, you can't. Midnight, you can.
That doesn't work, though, if you're faking out the kids, where you're.
I have done that.
You sped up the clock
All
to
I
make
can
it look like it's close to midnight.
So speaking of that, don't we have a limitation? Can they light it off all night long? Or is it 11 p.m.? Do we have a cutoff of how late
I
you
think
can?
it's midnight
On-
by state law.
I was gonna say, I believe the state law for New Year's Eve actually allows us slightly
Yeah.
later
There's
so
a
that
longer-
you can set it off to celebrate the switching of the clock. I know that for some really strange reason.
11 p.m. on, in like July, and July
is it really?
24th. 12,
Well,
it
they're
goes
still going
past
strong
that
at
in
midnight.
but people will light them off after that, obviously, but it is 11 p.m. is the
Chief, is it still the same that you can do it 3 days before, 3 days
days
after?
before, 2 days after.
Councilmember Bradshaw, do you want to suggest the 29th as our new date? When it ends?
Could I actually ask or make a suggestion? There's cultural significance for a lot of groups to set off fireworks also on Christmas Eve. And so I'm wondering if we could go, pedal it a little bit further, just to all of the holiday season, because they're just thinking about
You
those
going
who wish to
Real Christmas Eve or
set
Clint
off.
Christmas Eve?
Pardon?
Real Christmas Eve or Clint Christmas Eve?
Yeah.
Well, real Christmas Eve.
Okay.
Real Christmas Eve, and so,
Is that a
Could-
holiday that the state allows?
The state doesn't allow them now.
I was going to say, you've got to,
They don't.
the Utah
Okay,
code is
see,
the
I'm not
issue
aware of
there.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could stop it in November, but the state only allows
Right.
certain days for fireworks to be discharged.
got it.
Which is
Okay.
4th of July.
24th.
24th of July.
And
New
New
Year's
Year's
Day
Eve.
and Chinese New Year.
Chinese New Year.
Yep.
Yep.
So see
And-
how diverse we are already, Cecily?
I'm pushing for Christmas Eve.
Okay.
And I will say, based on Councilmember Bradshaw's comment, pro tip, Australia and YouTube are a great thing because you can just tell your kids that you can watch the ball drop at 9 p.m. and you show them Australia doing it, and it's the same year and everything, and they think it's done, and you go to sleep, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
Until the fireworks go off.
Then you got to get creative with how to muffle out the sound with sound machines.
All right, council, do you want to change the date on the ordinance?
Yeah.
Love to.
I think, I would ask the chief, though, would you like, because I just like to do what you like, would you like a clean date of like December 1, or would you like December 30th? What makes your life easy?
I'm good with December. I think December 1st is a good date. I do believe that any time in the winter time, once we get past November, is safe, and we wouldn't have any issues. So
Okay,
I think starting off, if you wanted to do December 1st, that would be great.
I think we should do December 25th in celebration for Christmas.
Yes. Just kidding. The firework or the grass fire conditions are very low during that time. So I feel comfortable with December 1st.
thank you, Chief. We're so lucky to have Chief Stone. Thank you so much. Any other thoughts on the date? that you want to recommend for this ordinance?
I'd like to propose that we change the date to December 30th, 2022.
I second.
And you can
Further
have-
discussion?
Is this,
Want to be more restrictive than state law, which allows folks to do fireworks 3 days before the holiday and 3 days following the holiday.
Actually, I believe does the
just in
state
July.
allow, that 3 days before and 2 days after is only for our July
Yeah, that's for the
holidays?
Really?
summer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow,
So
then never mind.
so you're recommending
It's only for
December?
when the risk is super high.
Yes.
Okay, so December 30th is our recommendation. You guys okay with that? Okay. All right, so with that change, anyone ready to make a motion?
Been made, seconded, and further discussed. I
All in
believe.
favor?
Aye.
I,
Did you get that? Did you get that motion and that second? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, we'll now move to consider approval of Advantage Reline for main line piping reline. Mr. Craig Christensen.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thanks for having me here this evening. So up in Summerwood, we have a 10-inch ductile iron line that is the sole feed. It's a transmission line that goes from our Camorra booster station and reservoir and goes up to the Summerwood tank. And that is the sole source for the Summerwood area. And with this 10-inch ductile iron line, we've over the last year and a half or so, it's kind of got to the point where it's deteriorating and it's starting to flake apart and causing multiple mainline breaks up there. And these mainline breaks are not just our typical beam breaks that we can put a little repair clamp on. It's cutting out large sections and cutting in pipe, and these trenches are very large. Kind of add an inconvenience to the residents that live up there. And so part of what we would like to do for this is we looked around at a couple different options as far as doing the traditional method of putting in the pipe one stick at a time, like traditionally we do throughout the city. Or there are some different options as far as using the same pipe that is there, but installing a liner in that pipe. And that liner is basically the same style of pipe that we would install, but it's not taking up extra space in the ground, already utilizing the pipe that's there. With this liner, they go through and we'll cut 2 access holes, one at the beginning, one at the end. And those are the 2 pits that they'll work off of. Typically about 6 feet by 10 feet is what they need. That portion of things will be done by the water department. The company could come in and then pull that liner through. And typically, they can get these things done in one day. It's a very long day, or it could be a 2-day type project. So the fact that this transmission line would only be down for a day or two, we should be able to have the reservoir demand to help for that Summerwood project, to feed Summerwood. So,
For you, Craig, if I could.
Yes, sir.
Mayor, is that okay? What is the length of throw that they can do between segments?
it depends on how straight the run is, how many different bends. If there's a 90-degree bend, it's a little bit harder for them to get through, and that restricts your pulling ability. But with that road being curved, they're using 22s to get around that bend from the Camorra. And so we've looked at the previous plans from what that was when they installed that. So there's just a couple of those bends through there. They can pull upwards of like 3,500 feet if it's a straight run.
Holy cow.
Yeah, they said on this one, because they've actually come out and looked at it, these companies, and they say there's no problem with them. So,
Wow, amazing.
yeah, just a couple hours to pull it through.
That's a
So,
good question.
yes.
I was curious, what is the lifespan for the liner as opposed to installing new pipe?
They're both about 50 years, so,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So that's kind of one of the benefits. It's even got the same C factor in it, so it doesn't have the restrictions in there, and it doesn't have the capabilities to build up like the ductile iron is a concrete line. And so it has a chance to get that buildup in there, but the lifespan, they're both about 50 years, so,
My only question is, can I come and watch them install that?
of course.
Seriously.
It sounds fascinating.
Yeah, this is something new to Bountiful City as far as the water department goes for a culinary water line. I think it's been used on storm drains, kind of a similar type product. Theirs is kind of like a blow-in liner, and then it gets adhered to the pipe, but this one is an actual Kevlar liner pipe, so.
So is the residents out of water for that full day, 2 days?
No, the reservoir would service the residents up there.
Okay.
And there is nobody on transmission lines because of the frequent on and offs of the pumps and the excessive pressures that are on there. And so no resident is serviced
pretty
off of these
seamless.
lines. Yeah. It would just be that if demand was high enough that, you know, the demand from the reservoir called too much and we weren't able to get that water back up there.
So we wouldn't want to time it for a fire, right?
Yes.
So the time savings and the potential impact to residents seem to make this a really great solution. I'm curious what the cost, we have the cost estimates here for the Kevlar pipe. What would the cost have been if you had gone the traditional route?
Okay, so I did this cost analysis off of Advantage Primus pipe and with the Newman Construction that we have as our pipe contractor this year off of their estimates. So we're looking at $120.46 a foot, basically, for this liner to be installed. This price here, I was not able to get a DR14 price, which is the higher classification of pipe, but the DR18 for Newman's pricing would have been $139 a foot. And at the time when I was making this analysis, our price of pipe as far as a city for the DR14 pipe was just shy of $50 a foot. And it's typically about 18 to 20. So.
Mayor, could I make one comment? One of the advantages to doing a liner project is that you save the cost of restoration in the street. So there wouldn't be the asphalt patching or the deterioration to the road surface.
That's great consideration.
Well, I think you should make it an open and public meeting because I think all of us want to come see how this works.
You'll have to let us know when.
All right, well, we can let you know. We did reach out to 3 companies. 2 of them got back with us for bids. One of them was not capable of working in Utah. They were a California company, so coming up here just wasn't in their job frame. So some of the impacts are going to be that the capital budget is going to be affected, obviously, and it might push back one of our projected pipe jobs that we had for this year scheduled. But with the severity of this and the importance of having that line, we kind of figure this is one of those worthwhile things to do. I've talked with city manager and public works director, and it is our recommendation that we get the approval for pipe relining from Advantage Reline at the price of $149,189. If there's any other questions, I'll entertain those.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve this contract with Advantage Ridgeline for this pipe replacement.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we will now consider approval of the purchase of the Pavement Preservation System, HA5 from Holbrook Asphalt. Mr. Charles Benson.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Yes, I come before you tonight to talk about our pavement preservation program. This type of seal coating that we're using here is actually out here on the road right behind you on First East. This is one that we use in our lower areas of the town where it's not as steep a grade, where we have to worry about traction control. This product, we've been using it since 2013 with great results and all that. So unfortunately, during our economic times here, the price for this oil-based product has gone up considerably. We were at 20 cents last year. It's gone up to 26.4 cents this year on this. We reviewed the report. This is a sole source item, this high-density mineral bond, and it's provided by Holbrook Asphalt, and it's called the HA5 product on here. The street department, we have allocated around $100,000 a year that we use on this type of product, and we go by the square footage of the road, and so the price varies. So we're asking that the council approve the Holbrook Asphalt at the unit price of 26.4 cents a square foot. Is there any other questions that the council had to have?
Sounds great. I'd be happy to make a motion that we approve this particular street lotion as Charles has presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Charles.
Did you say lotion?
Yeah. Street lotion. Keep the moisture in. Sorry, bad reference.
No, it has been referred to as street lotion. Okay, we will now consider approval of a contract with MC Green and Sons for storm drain projects. Mr. Lloyd Cheney.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight I have for your consideration the award of a contract for the installation of storm drains on 800 East and also on 400 South. The 800 East project has been sort of a problem over the years. We've had a few incidents of flooding in the neighborhood when these big summer rainstorms come. And the engineering department's identified some deficiencies up there that we would like to remedy and hopefully alleviate some of the concerns of the neighborhood for the flooding issues. The 400 South project is in advance of a reconstruction that's planned by the street department and would extend the storm drain east a block or so. So both of these are great projects. They're needed to be done. In the memo, I pointed out a couple of issues. Obviously, the availability of concrete right now is a concern. We do have the opportunity to consider some alternate materials for the 800 East project. That's probably the higher priority project that we would like to get done. We'll be looking into that further with our contractor, but we do have pricing that is good for concrete pipe, which is our preferred material to put in the road. It's more durable, proven itself well over the years. But there are other products that we would consider as alternates that would certainly speed up the timeline for installation, maybe save a few dollars too. We're all well acquainted with MC Green and their ability to perform in these kinds of projects. And I would just add that it's good to hire a guy from your own town, keep a few dollars here in town. And I'd be happy to answer any other questions you have.
Lloyd, what are some of those products, alternative products that we could use?
They're basically plastic products, high-density polyethylene, and I forget the other one, but yeah, they're basically plastic. What we don't want to use is a corrugated metal pipe, a galvanized pipe, because they certainly don't last.
So are we using those plastic products anywhere else in the city, and what's their lifespan compared to the concrete?
They're a similar lifespan. We don't typically use them a lot. They take a little more care to install because with a concrete pipe, it's a rigid structure, and the strength of the pipe is actually built into the pipe. It has steel reinforcing to it. With these plastic pipes, you have to be really careful with your backfill and compaction. The strength of these pipes relies on the adjacent strength of the soil, and you have to be very careful with the alignment of the pipe. You know, obviously, if you get a big, long 20-foot piece of pipe, they can have a little bit of a natural bow to it, and you certainly don't want any high points or low points in a storm drain. You want it to drain freely and not pond any water. So it takes a little more care. UDOT uses it all the time. If you drive up I-15 towards Centerville, you'll see piles of that stuff where they're working on the West Davis corridor. They use it all the time. They love it. It's very durable, and it's widely used. We just have chosen to use concrete pipe here in the city, generally speaking.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I'd be happy to make a motion, particularly excited to see the 8th East project go forward. So I'd make a motion that we approve the MC Green contract for $638,764.50.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you.
If need be.
Okay, we will now move to discuss the general plan process update. Mr. Astorga.
Thank you. Can we connect real quick? I usually have to move it. No, you should have to move it. There we go. Thank you, Mayor and Council. This item is intended to provide you an update, very similar to what we did with the Planning Commission. At first, I debated whether I was going to do a PowerPoint, but then I decided to simply stick to exactly what I showed the Planning Commission, where I highlighted the highlights, not to sound repetitive here. Now that I've had several opportunities to review this. Before we jump into it, I just wanted to say that we as a reminder, we received a grant through Wasatch Front Regional Council. And they provided $100,000 for this project, and we put in $20,000 from the planning department's budget. The selection committee included myself, Mr. Lloyd Cheney, Council Member Jesse Bell, Planning Commission Member Lynn Jacobs, Michaela Jordan with Wasatch Front Regional Council, and we received four requests to provide, to update our general plan, and the city we selected Logan Simpson Design. And I want to summarize the main reason why we selected them was based on their public outreach component that they had. Excuse me, moving on to, this is their scope. I like to call it their timeline. And I just want to go over it real quick. It has 4 phases consisting of 9 tasks. Actually, there are 10. So the first one is the foundation and research with task 1, the project initiation and ongoing management. I'm not going to do a death by PowerPoint. I'm not going to read every word, but I do wanted to hit some highlights where we are starting out with a kickoff meeting with city staff. They have a hands-on project management. They've incorporated hands-on project management activities where we've already started having biweekly meetings through conference calls to make sure that we're on the same page. As indicated in the write-up, we recommend, this is Logan Simpson, we recommend a 10 to 12 person steering committee of community representatives, city council and planning commission representatives / liaisons, business / major property owners, county and neighboring municipality planners, infrastructure agencies, developers, and partner organizations. About that real quick, we want to make sure that we're on the same page, and we want to follow that the city council appointment be made by the mayor as far as who gets to participate. Logan Simpson Design have provided clarity that they recommend no more than 1 council member serving on that steering committee, and it's their same recommendation of no more than 1 planning commission member to serve on, as well on that steering committee. And we would like both of those appointments to come from the mayor, as the mayor gets to make those appointments through the different organizations that you serve on.
Just want to ask about that. So when they recommend a council member and a planning commission member on the steering committee, is there a reason why they recommend limiting it to just one, or?
Yes, there are several reasons. The first reason, which is the biggest reason, is that the more public participation that we get on a comprehensive general plan update, the more community buy-off that we're going to have throughout the whole process. In this timeline, we also have 4 work sessions with the Planning Commission, you, the City Council, as well as the Steering Committee. The general plan is...
Or independent work sessions, so 8, or 4 with the planning commission, 4 with the city council?
No, these
or
are
4
joint sessions.
Joint,
These
okay.
are 4 joint sessions. So this is you and the Planning Commission and the Steering Committee, and obviously the public involved in that. And the reason why we wanted to have 4 of those joint sessions was to give you an update of what's going on throughout the whole process. In addition to those work sessions, joint work sessions, you also get, by the consultant, 2 rounds of red lines and 2 rounds of public hearing process, in addition to the 1-month public outreach. So going back to your question is, Logan Simpson, they've been around for quite some time, and they've done, I don't know, probably not hundreds, but tons of comprehensive general plan. And their recommendation makes total sense to us, that if we get too many elected or appointed officials, it's going to feel like it's the council's plan, it's the planning commission plan, instead of what we're truly going forth, that is that we want it to be the community's plan. So that is the reason why they recommend only having 1 member of the commission and only 1 member of the council.
Can I ask a follow-up question about the makeup of the steering committee? Because I got it loud and clear, you don't want us.
Yeah.
The business and major property owners, are those envisioned to be business and major property owners who also happen to be residents of Bountiful, or people that live outside of Bountiful? And then secondarily, county and neighboring municipal planners, and infrastructure agencies, developers, and partner organizations. That, to me, is a little concerning. I don't know that I'm sort of interested in being steered by people that don't live in our city.
Yeah, so let me take the first question, which was about the developer / Bountiful resident. It would be ideal to get that combo into one. So we're looking into that. Usually our developers don't live in our city, and that's just fine, but we do want to include them. Example, Bruce Broadhead, major property owner, controls Renaissance Town Center. I think it would be a great idea to put him on that. He doesn't live in the city.
So I do want to push back on that just a little bit. We do have others like Brian Knowlton who are involved in that project that do live in the city. I'm not necessarily advocating for him, but I don't know. I feel kind of strongly about, while the business interests are important and development considerations are important, I've always viewed this general plan as being, designed by Bountiful residents for Bountiful residents. So that made me just a little nervous to hear kind of that.
Right.
That direction.
If I may say, we're not thinking of only inviting one developer.
You lost your...
We're not thinking of also inviting just one developer. And obviously, as we go through this process, Brian and even Randy Byer are both being considered. I'm trying to remember my password real quick.
Don't say it out loud on the... Password 1.
No, it's 2.
5.
Yeah, I think...
So, Council Member Bradshaw, Bruce is not the only one being considered for that. On the second aspect, I am not thrilled on the other 2 categories, and I'm not thinking we're going to put any of them there for the utility providers or for county or other municipal planners.
Thank you.
And for partner organizations, we're thinking perhaps someone from BDAC, perhaps someone from Main Street Merchants Alliance, Community Service Council, Historical Society, or and the one that I have to have, we want to get someone from the the city youth council. We want a high schooler. We want a senior that obviously lives in Bountiful. So that would be part of the partner organizations. But I'm glad you caught the other two categories. I wasn't thrilled about them, and I don't have any of them on my list.
I'm glad to hear that.
I'd like to just tag team on Councilmember Bradshaw's comment. When I look at Bountiful, I think we have an incredibly vibrant city that is full of business owners, developers, et cetera, who live in the city. When I hear that it is ideal, what I hear with that is that it's aspirational as opposed to something that we're going to hold ourselves accountable to get those different hats filled by people who also live in Bountiful. We have a population of close to 50,000, and I would dare say that in this steering committee that is going to have, I don't know, a few members of staff, a planning commission member, a member of city council, you are down now to 6 or 7 additional spots on the steering committee. I personally would really love to see, and second Councilmember Bradshaw's recommendation, that those be Bountiful residents. They are closer, they are invested, they have set roots here. All of us who are in this room well, not all of us, but we put our roots here, and we put our major investment here by living here and buying a home here and participating in the community. I also just had one question about when you say that there's, you anticipate that there will be more than one developer. Again, just with that smaller number of people now who are left to fill those positions, 6 or 7 or whatever that number is, I hesitate, or I just question the more than one developer when we're only having one council member who is actually accountable to the voters and to the residents and to the community. So that's just kind of piggybacking on that comment.
If I may clarify, no staff members will be part of the steering committee. I'm the project manager, so yes, I get to participate and attend, help facilitate, but I will not be a steering committee a member, and neither will be anyone from my staff or even from the city. We do want them to be Bountiful residents. We agree, completely agree, that if we can find that sweet spot like Randy Byer, like Brian Knowlton, where they do both, that's great. But we also recognize that there are other developers that have a significant amount of land that they own. And obviously, we'll discuss that internally as we make the appointments. We think that 3 developers is about right. We don't want it to only be one person either. And as you shared comment here, we don't want it to be too developer heavy either. So this is, we are moving forward with the recommendation that was provided. Again, the Planning Commission will have plenty meetings. We do believe that City Council, that you will have plenty meetings. And the same way that a lot of you attended, say, the Washington Park master planning process, you can for sure attend any meeting. But we want to give that time more so for the steering committee. So
Francisco, can you allay some fears for me? What I fear looking at that sheet is that by the time we see anything of note, the goals are going to be set and the vision's going to be set, and we're going to be far enough down the road that anything we say is going to be uncomfortable and not wanted. And we already have a name for it, and I noticed that they were going to brainstorm on the name as well. So if you could just make note of the name real quick. The name is Bountiful by Design, and we can put whatever years we want to on it, and I stole that from Palm Springs. So just make note of that, and then let me know why I shouldn't worry that we're not going to see anything until it's too late to exercise any sort of our responsibility as elected officials to have influence on the process.
That first joint work session comes in the first task right here.
Okay.
With the Planning Commission. So yes, we will have our internal city staff kickoff meeting. We have the steering committee meeting, and then we have right away, we have joint session number 1. And we are inviting all steering committee members to attend that joint city council and planning commission meeting.
So I think it's a great question, and I think it would actually be very helpful for that steering committee to hear the council's vision for what you expect this to be, to the degree you can articulate a unified vision for it at that meeting.
Can I suggest that those two meetings they need to be reversed, quite frankly, that the city council and planning commission joint work session ought to be first, and then a steering committee. I feel like the order of who reports to who is out of whack there.
Yeah, and I don't know if this was intended to be the timeline that was prepared by the consultant, but we can certainly mix things around. I don't think that they're going to have any issues with that or strong recommendations.
Below that, it does say formation of the steering committee, so
Right.
this may not be, how can the steering committee meet if they haven't
Right.
been formed yet?
Right.
But you have the steering committee meeting before the introductory overview work session.
Right, I recognize, but it's not in sequential order.
Right.
But so what I'm hearing is, if I may,
Please.
Is that joint work session first before the steering committee meets. That's easily accomplished.
Yep.
And then, as far as the makeup is concerned, I'm looking for consensus, but it looks like all Bountiful residents, if we can achieve that in any way, which I'm pretty sure we can. We have a lot of experts in the city, and a priority on. This is a question. We get the. This is a two-edged sword, right? This idea of a regular Bountiful resident. I don't know that a regular Bountiful resident exists, but I'm assuming that we want people with a vested interest, whether that be some professional experience or, as Francisco mentioned, people who are property owners or developers, in addition to folks who just have a vested interest in Bountiful. So, we're thinking of people like the Sam Boddens of the world, the former planning commissioner who's got some expertise and some skill both in working on committees but professionally, and has a vested interest in Bountiful. But it sounds like the priority is for more of the people who have less of a development or moneyed interest and more of a professional slash
Community interest.
Thank you. Am I reading that right?
I think both need to be there.
Yeah.
I really do.
But if we had to err on the side of numbers, it would be more community interest than
Yes.
development interest. Is that?
And Bountiful residents.
And all Bountiful residents, which I think we can do.
Within those parameters, I think obviously it would be great if we could see, as you mentioned, it's hard to identify the quintessential Bountiful resident, but, so I'd love to see us reach some geographic representation from different parts of Bountiful, different age and socioeconomic stratas of Bountiful. I think the inclusion of a youth council member is a great idea as well, so I'm happy to see that we're thinking in that direction.
Yeah.
So the same way that we asked the planning commission to forward names to me, we make that same request from you Forward names, send me a text and tell me why you think they should be on it. I can't promise, as I may have too many names, but we'll definitely consider it.
Yeah, these parameters are really, that's really helpful. So thank you.
Thanks for letting us talk about it tonight.
Yeah, thank you. We,
So unless you have any other concerns, we would love to move on to task 2.
You mean that wasn't the entire presentation?
That was not. Task 2 is very simple.
Could it just rolling back to the steering committee and asking for recommendations? Is there a timeline in which you're wanting those recommendations, and can people self-recommend? Like
Yes.
someone watching tonight, they're saying, I want to self-recommend, and when would you like those names?
Yes and yes. So the urgency is as soon as possible. As soon as possible would be for you to text me names. I was going to say end of the week, but yeah, sure. We'll go by the end of the month, May 31st, midnight.
Can we set up fireworks?
Nope.
Not even at
And
9?
and if anybody out there, if they don't have I'd rather get the text. Come to the office and we'll, my office will connect you with me. So thank you. But I think this will be an easy task. I think we're going to end up with 12 people. So we're going to move on to task 2, which is very simple and fast. This is the consultant is going to establish a baseline regarding a demographic, land use evaluation, and so forth, just so we can try to compare ourselves. Going to move on to the next task. This one is huge, and that's why I highlighted the entire component. This is a community engagement plan. Our residents are to expect a straightforward, thought-provoking, and accessible outreach. Decision makers should expect public feedback to be synthesized efficiently and transparently. So this is what the consultant recommends: 7 steering committee meetings, one-on-one interviews with all members of the steering committee, with all of city council, and all of the planning commissioners. These are about 20 interviews. On top of that, they want to interview another 20 people. So maybe if you don't get into that steering committee, you get the interview. So I do need another list. So, and that's what we're working on. Then we have 3 publicly notified focused small group sessions. That comes later on towards the end. We do have a mobile meeting place for 2 open houses and drop-in sessions. That's also towards the end. Moving on to the next page. Presence at 2 local community events. We thought farmers market and maybe food truck league, or even through hand cart days. Get a tent or something going on. This would be towards the middle, task 5. Website with project information, engagement activities, and deliverables. 3 digital questionnaires and online mapping. Middle, towards the end, and the end. Real-time interactive polling at each community event. And plan an open house, which is included beginning, middle, and end. And then perhaps a specific downtown outreach that we could do on site. So the steering committee, they get to, I wouldn't say fine tune it, but they really get to look at this and see if we need to add more or if we need to do less. But this is what got them the bid, the robust outreach compared to the other consultants that came in. So we're going to move on to, I don't know if I talked to you or not, but their consultants telling me we could move it. Oh, I'm sorry, this wasn't updated. They're telling me that we could move it to a 14-month process. We could go from 16 to 14 months. So that's good news in that sense of urgency that we have. And I'm just going to move on to, task 4. This might sound a little repetitive because it includes the outreach components that we just outlined in that, plan that we just went through. It reiterates the 40 in-person interviews. That includes you and the commission and the steering committee. We have a promotional campaign that we want to get going during this time frame. Questions are going to be asked at both interviews and kickoff events, which will also be included with the online questionnaire and marketed throughout social media outlets, newsletters, our website, any other methods that they have. Moving on to task 5, which is the vision and the framework map. Following the initial public outreach, steering committee number 3 will review feedback and review and refine a preliminary vision and framework map, illustrating the community's shared values. The task will summarize and illustrate locational, community values and goals that provide direction for the plan.
Could I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
In that task 5, where we're looking at the visioning and the framework, will that include kind of a final determination of what the elements are going to be? Or where, did I miss that?
Yeah, no,
where does that happen, where we
It's going to have a...
fine tune that?
Yeah, it's going to have a preliminary outline of what we need to come up with, but it comes back on, I think, task 8, and I'll get to that one in just a moment. But we should have an idea since we have, well, no, this is just the vision. I'm sorry. No, we're not there yet on the elements. This is just the vision. So I'm going to move on to task 6, opportunities in redevelopment areas. They're going to provide it in an identified narrative form with potential goals, objectives, strategies, illustrated and overlaid on an aerial map. This is steering committee number 4 to evaluate the areas and their propensity towards change, thoughtful redevelopment, local housing, employment, the whole works. Moving on to key opportunities in land use. This is task 7. We're right in the time frame when we're doing fireworks here. Re-engages the community regarding the refined vision and key issues identified throughout the previous outreach and translates that vision into reality. And then we have additional meetings. This is going to be kind of interesting, as the consultant is telling me we could take one of those or 2 of those meetings, or all 3 of them, and focus in one area of town. It could be that we're looking at 200 West. It could be that we're looking at the hospital zone. It could be that we're looking at the Mandarin site, and we're going to have more specificity as far as that refined vision and how we could move forward with that redevelopment. We're going to move on to the next task. This is the draft plan development. This is what you were thinking. This is the 2-part document, 1 part focused on public audience, 2nd part focused on affected officials and staff. This is in response to what we wrote. We wanted the document to be user-friendly, to be illustrative, with the executive summary to provide a preliminary flexible living document to incorporate on our website, and obviously the steering committee will be more involved. And this is where we're going to have the full preliminary plan concept with the specified elements. The sustainability and smart growth might be combined with the newly required water resource component. We don't know yet, as we need to get going on this. I did personally request an economic development element in there, and the other 3 classic are the required elements I have to have through Utah State Code: land use, moderate income housing, and transportation. The good news about the transportation component is, since we're at a matured stage of built out, we're not laying new roads other than the lotion on our roads, but they are willing to take a look at our drafted active transportation plan and incorporate that full document into our comprehensive general plan. So this is the step that you were just thinking of through that full preliminary plan document. Moving on, and we're almost there. Whoa, I went to task 9.
Can I ask sorry, again, looking at that, those elements, is there, and not saying that they are going to happen, but if there were a consensus on specific overlay zones, where would that happen? Is that like in the visioning process? Is that steering committee? Where would those types of things?
It would depend what the overlay zone would be intended for. Most likely we're referring to land use. So the principle or the goal of that would probably land in the land use element, but the actual overlay would be a subsequent future change to our zoning code.
Right.
Does that make sense? But we need to first make sure that we want to reach a specific goal, and we do that through that specific overlay.
Mm-hmm.
So most likely it would land in the land use element. As far as that vision, objective, and goal, but the actual provision would be in our land use code or zoning map.
I wouldn't imagine the overlays in high detail. I was just saying that the overlay, I would imagine, would be in more conceptual form.
Correct.
In the land use plan, and then subsequent plan. If we try to get too much into this, my concern is it'll be over budget, over time frame, and there's a separate process for that I would think would be more appropriate.
Completely agree. The whole point of this exercise is to provide direction, guidance, goals, policies, and then, like I keep telling people, the real work starts once we adopt this plan, and then we roll up our sleeves. We take one weekend off, then we roll up our sleeves, and we start amending our land use code and our zoning map. And that's where the rubber meets the road. So many puns on streets here. Okay, going on to task 9. Outreach events, public review. The online draft plan and questionnaires on key plan elements and action item prioritization will be available for public comment during a 1-month review period. The review period will include 2 open house drop-in sessions for attendees to learn about key changes and plan features and discuss enhancements to the draft plan. This is the final steering committee meeting to review public feedback and incorporate final revisions into the general plan. And then we will prepare both Planning Commission, City Council overview presentations prior to adoption. I believe this is the 3rd joint meeting with the Planning Commission. And then the final one, that should be a task 10, not 11. This is for staff, steering committee, the Planning Commission, review the draft plan through 2 joint work sessions. That's also with you, with council, before the public hearings with the Planning Commission and City Council. Minimum of 2 public hearings and 2 rounds of revisions are anticipated before the adoption of the plan. And that is the final step. So we want to, I guess it was a 13-month process. We want to have a June 2023 adopted general plan, and then in July, we'll get going with amending our zoning map and our land use code. And obviously, that will also take a while. We'll probably do 1 element or 1 chapter at a, well, it depends. I don't want to commit to anything, but we'll get there right, as we can. So this is the presentation that I provided to the Planning Commission. Thanks for the update. I think we need to move on to the next item unless you have any pressing questions.
I had one last question on the kind of the end of this timeline. You know, the plan seems to have us meeting jointly with the Planning Commission for most of this process, but we don't seem to ever have a standalone council work session before we would consider a final vote for adoption. Does it seem like something like that ought to be inserted in?
Let me double check that real quick. So we have a minimum of 2, I'm reading just from this task 10, 11, minimum 2 public hearings and 2 rounds of revisions. And then we just had the joint session with the commission. I think if it's not intended as such, we can certainly add it. I don't think that's a big component or item.
I think I'm a big fan of getting to have a work session, a standalone work session before we vote on something that's as massive as a plan intended to stand for the next decade, so.
I would support that.
I think that we could incorporate it at any time. I think that through the outreach and the work sessions, it's intended to keep you updated along the way. I'm not disputing that is necessary, but we can certainly incorporate it before adoption. And obviously, you're the legislative body. You're the one that adopts it, changes, rejects it, changes whatever we need to change. So obviously, we could accommodate whatever you see fit.
I think if my colleagues agreed, I'd suggest that we add that as a final step.
So my concern is having a significant, I don't know that it would be if we're brought along the way, but having a significant number of changes at the very end of the process that might deviate from that years-long process to disenfranchise people that were involved. Not saying it would, but maybe that meeting is maybe earlier in the process than not, potentially. Just
I don't know, Councilwoman Bradshaw, I'm wondering if we could call a meeting as needed as the process proceeds, if you feel like there's something that you, as things are proceeding, that you see as something that needs to be discussed, or?
You know, I think you've got, these 3 joint work sessions built in, what seems like a beginning, middle, and end. But I do think that in a final adoption of this process, we're where that process stops. We're the ones that have to take the message to the public and take the criticisms and concerns from the public. And so I would think that having that final opportunity for a full briefing in a work session before a council meeting, before that vote, to make sure that any of those last kinks are worked out, would be my request.
in the spirit of last kinks, that makes sense, just to make sure that we've got all the T's crossed and I's dotted, and that it meets the process throughout the way. I agree.
Does that sound okay if we give you that direction?
Yeah, we can do that.
So just to clarify, I believe the state code requires that there be a public hearing at the Planning Commission, and then they take action, and then a public hearing at the City Council, after which you take action. So would this work session be between?
A work session in between those two things.
Between the Planning Commission after the Planning Commission adoption, but before the City
Yes.
Council adoption?
Yeah, so I'd like to have a work session on the Planning Commission's formal recommendation, presuming it's to adopt, before we would then have a hearing and a vote to adopt.
For the sake of people who are, the sake of people who are interested, who come and want to be involved or learn about what we're doing, do you feel like a work session where we talk about it and then a public hearing in that meeting that would follow would be appropriate?
You mean at the beginning of the process?
Mm-hmm. Or no, just
At the end?
mm-hmm. So that, when it's time for us to have a public hearing and adopt it, if we have a work session prior to that meeting, then that way, for people who are interested, then they don't have to come, then they can come for one night and see the result of what they're interested in.
I'm sensitive to the fact that, we've got some people who've stuck out a very long Tuesday with us. I'm presuming not because they were interested in hearing about road lotion, but because they're interested in the fiber discussion that's to be continued. But when we make a decision that is going to last for, something that's going to be binding and impactful for a decade, I feel like we can impose on the public to consider 2 Tuesdays in their month. And I think that's important because there's going to be some people that just naturally don't hear about the process. They will just find out late. It will be some Facebook post that finally catches their attention, or some article in the Davis Journal that, doing a summary catch-up where they have an aha moment. And I think because this plan is intended to guide us for a very long time, I would prefer that they have that opportunity, and then there be that, 2-week time period where then they can catch up and prepare whatever they might want to say in that public hearing. If it were something of that was going to be binding for a year or less, I don't know that I'd feel as strongly, but it's also why I felt like the filing process needed to have an opportunity to be heard, and then have everyone be able to mull on it and think about it and poke some holes in it, and then come back for another bite for a final decision.
Makes sense, thank you. Any other questions or thoughts about that? Okay, so are you clear on what we're asking for?
Yes, you're asking for a city council work session after the planning commission provides a recommendation to the council. So we're not going to simply move on from their recommendation for you to review it and then adopt or change or whatever. We're gonna have a work session discussion with council and then schedule another meeting, possibly for adoption. Obviously, you're the legislative body. You may call as many meetings as you need there, in between there, but we'd like to update that on our timeline.
Thank you. Any other discussion about this master plan?
This was really helpful.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Okay, we will now move to circle back around to our work session item to discuss the Magellan fiber presentation. Should we go back to Alan? Is that okay, Alan? Thank you for
Keep your seat warm.
Thank you for staying.
So I think we can jump right into questions. I don't know that staff has anything else to present. I think we
True.
can-
Okay. Yeah. Alan, did you make it through your presentation? Was there anything else that you thought was pertinent to tell us, or?
I didn't even think Alan got to talk.
I know. Yeah. Was there anything that you felt like you didn't get to present earlier?
I did have some updated figures based on the charts that were in the staff report. Let me just see if I can get that pulled up real quick.
Sorry, Alan, I forgot about that.
Maybe coming up soon. There it goes. Yeah, a few of the things that we need to take a look at. Let me find my overview real quick. So as been alluded to several times, there are a lot of levers, a lot of options, a lot of variables in this project. Take rates, bond rates. So here are some updated numbers based on what we've received. So from what was in the staff report, the main differences are this category, or this column right here. So these are updated figures from Utopia. Thank you to Tyson, by the way, to trying to compare all these components that weren't all lined up the same. In other words, not everybody had a 100 megabit proposal. Here we have a 250. So this will just show you that for 1 gigabyte or gigabit, those are the options, and I think that's estimated by everybody that that'll be the most popular option. Business internet also, we have 125 estimated for Strata, quite a range between a gigabit business service, pretty high for 10 gigabyte.
Alan, by way of comparison, do you remember what Google's 1 gigabit service was? Was it 85?
I think it was 85.
Okay.
On the next chart, it shows we had 33 million, which was what Utopia had estimated a year ago. So based on the bond rate difference and the material costs, that's gone up this far. They're also estimating they had, actually their most recent bond was 4.11, so they're trying to be conservative and estimate 4.3. The construction length, they indicated with just recent information that it'd be 24 months would be their target, but they would also estimate 36 months. The estimated take rate necessary to cover the bond costs, they had 51%, but he also added, or Utopia also indicated that they would try to take advantage of the aerial as well. And then this didn't really change. This last part didn't change. Any questions on these updated numbers?
Alan, are you saying that the Utopia figures for the take rates did not take into account maybe cost reductions due to utilizing some aerial?
Correct.
Okay.
And one other comment about the micro-trenching. Strata felt pretty strongly that the newer technology for micro-trenching is worth revisiting. And we haven't talked to them at all about that since, but they were concerned that the cost for the project would be pretty high if it's all directional drilling or boring. So between possibility of looking at micro-trenching and whatever aerial we can use, every one of the Magellan, Utopia, and Strata all felt that the cost could be reduced quite a bit. The original cost proposal for Magellan was about $19 million difference.
Reduction in price.
Reduction in price for doing aerial, but then also the complication is Mr. Johnson indicated, we can't use all the poles because they're not tall enough and they're too old, and
Isn't it estimated that the cost of replacing all those poles is approximately that same price?
yes. Yep. About the cost difference
Of the savings.
between being able to use aerial. Yeah.
Do you know what percentage of aerial that's based on? Like, what would that?
I don't think I have that.
We don't know that yet. We wouldn't know that until we actually did the design and engineering. That number of 21 million is just based off of the 3,000 poles that we know need to be replaced. Is that right, Alan? Yes. So it may not be that we need all 3,000 poles to be replaced to provide aerial. It may be some number less than that, but we won't know that until we actually design the system.
I have a question for Alan about the poles.
Can he stay seated, or do you want him to
You
come up?
can stay seated, I don't care.
Well,
If you don't mind, come to the
public
mic for
that still
the,
might be on.
Oh, yeah.
for anyone
We
listening.
have a council colleague that's on.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I also realize I don't talk very loud, so I'll get closer anyway, so.
Okay. So I'm wondering from a replacement standpoint, if we were to upgrade this pole infrastructure kind of all at once in this big push, and that it is something approximating 3,000 poles, do you foresee any unintended consequences in the future of having our infrastructure age out all at the same time in the future?
Absolutely. We'll say 30 or 35 years from now, or 40 years, because I don't think the new poles hold up as well as the older ones do. All of a sudden, all these poles are going to age at about the same time, and you're going to have another big push where if we continue what you're doing and you're moving along, and maybe we can find a way to accelerate that, you have poles aging at a different time. But yeah, if you have 3/4 of our poles that all get put in within a year or two, they're all going to want to die at about the same year or two at that point. So absolutely, that's a good valid point.
Thanks.
So, if I may, the difficult issue, one of the difficult issues here is, I don't know how to make a decision based on such incomplete information about the potential aerial installation. I mean, can we dial it in a little bit to know more about what number of poles need to be replaced in order to go aerial? I know that we talked in one of the meetings about looking for locations that have already had enough replacement that we could take advantage of those areas aerially.
Yeah, as we've talked about, we've been going, not necessarily one single pole, we've been going through like a block at a time and going through. The problem is we didn't do it in any sort of a semblance that we would be putting a fiber or using it. So what we've been looking for is areas that had the worst, whether they were rotting on the bottom, water's been spraying from sprinklers, or the tops were damaged. And so we've scattered it, so it's scattered through the whole city. And what we're really looking at was because the bulk of the system was built in with these 40 and 35-foot poles and do not have enough height. It's not like, well, let's put them up and we'll put new poles in and take care of the strength later. We just don't have the height to be able to do it. As I've indicated, some of what you may be able to use is if you have main lines, which I would assume, and again, I'm not a fiber designer, but I'm going to assume they're going to follow some of our same main lines. If we were to go back in and work on our main lines, you may be able to get through some of the overhead areas to get to the underground and save some money. But as far as coming back and saying which one it is, I really can't come back because I've only got a handful. And we did run through a thing to look to see how many 45-foot poles that we've put in the last 25 years. And it's not much greater than the 25% that we've changed in the last 15 years. Now, some of those poles are going to be I'll call them the 35-foot poles that are going off to service lines where you may have a deeper backyard where you come and drop and come down to it. Most of them would probably want to be changed, but they're not going to be near as complicated to do. So some of my estimate that I give them sort of took into the fact that I'm going to have some really expensive, messy poles, and then some of these more easy poles that you would change, trying to give them an average cost.
Right.
But yeah, it's really tough at this point, not being a fiber guy. I mean, I understand it's the same concept. I've got to get in between each house. I got to drop a service line in. I mean, the basic concerns. But when they start talking about the huts and what they got to run and the size of cable, I don't know what that is. So that's why it's really tough for me to say how many more poles to dial that in. I mean, I get where it is. And I feel bad I can't give you a better idea other than I can just look at the number of poles we've changed and the number of poles that we have not yet changed.
So if this is an unknowable thing, what do we base a decision on? I mean, I have a real desire to benefit both the power department and the cost for the system if we can make the system aerial and durable. But I don't know what to base the system on other than just that desire. I don't really want to make a weighty decision like this based on my emotion. So what do we base it on?
So I don't think it's unknowable. I think it is that we can't give any better numbers until we actually engineer the system.
Okay.
So we're kind of at that decision point of if we're interested enough to continue to look at a city-owned system, we have to engineer it now. And hopefully looking at the numbers, knowing we're comfortable spending that next amount of money to go to the design, or we probably need to decide, no, we're not comfortable doing that, and we should just find another provider to do it that isn't city-owned. We just don't have a better way to drill down past the assumptions that we have without actually designing it now.
So,
Gary, what do you anticipate that would look like? I mean, as far as time, staff resources, and money?
So we would do an RFP for for an engineering firm to design it. And that was, in fact, I think that's one of the commitments we made to the public when we hired Magellan, was that we wouldn't simply extend Magellan's contract to do the engineering. So it would be an RFP. There frankly aren't that many firms out there. This might be an opportunity, for example, for a Utopia. If they wanted to consider a city-owned Utopia operated, they could also bid on engineering the project for us. We expect Strata would be interested in that because we've been bringing them along. Magellan might be interested in that. I don't know the amount of time it would take. My guess is, boy, I'm trying to think back to their timeline that they have in here, but I'm thinking is it 6 months? I think it's a 6-month process.
Do we have a cost estimate of what that might cost?
I don't at this point. We may have something that they've shown us, but so that, I mean, that's sort of the risk we're taking, right? Is if we don't like those answers at the end of engineering, those are sunk costs that are lost.
So if we hired Utopia,
My guess is it's going to be around $1 million, if I had to guess.
if we hired Utopia, they would do the design as part of the cost.
Correct.
It would be all incorporated in. And are we saying that we would not, is it your suggestion that if it was Utopia, they would not use the poles?
No, they would love to use the poles, but they would not pay for that. And we would not, and our residents wouldn't see any reduction in the cost of service because they are going to charge the same thing to our residents that they charge to everybody else.
So is
So
there
there
any?
is no financial advantage to to Bountiful's fiber network if Utopia owns and operates it for us to change our poles. It's going to be the same cost for our residents.
Is there any harm in going to RFP and saying, we're interested in a provider or in not specifying whether it will be whether we will be the owner of the infrastructure? If we say, we're going to RFP and we want to see what providers will bring to the table, and then they can offer to what they would charge to run it themselves and own it themselves, and they can also provide what they would charge if we owned it and if they operated it.
They're going to want to design it for the end product. And so I'm sure that Utopia would be happy to have us pay for an engineering cost for them to own it and operate it at our expense, that if we're willing to pay for that, we could do that. But I see it costing more money and more time if we want to have an open-ended design of you own it or we own it. I think we have to make a decision on the engineering before we do an RFP, that the intent of the RFP is for a city-owned, somebody else operated. I don't think it can be so open-ended that it's gonna be both ways.
Wouldn't that allow for just more competition? We could just see more options. We could just see what people are willing to provide and.
Sure, but we have to pay for it. I mean, we're talking about asking people to design 2 different systems that we would pay for. So we're talking about doubling the cost of engineering, potentially.
At the RFP process, they're not actually doing the engineering, they're just
giving you, giving you how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to take.
Yeah, and some basic parameters. So we're not out any money if we do do the RFPs. I'm curious to find out if, not Magellan, Utopia, how they would, so are you saying that the specific question has been asked, would you be willing to build in the cost of the power poles into their build-out, into their, their costs that they would go out to bond for? Because
No,
They're
what,
realizing, I mean, going aerial, utilizing aerial, it ends up being like the same amount. I'm just, has the specific question been asked to Utopia specifically about the power poles?
The
Or are we just
question-
assuming?
so the question has been asked, will you reduce your fees if construction is less expensive? And the answer is no. So that's the question that's been asked and answered.
I think this is why the mayor's suggestion would be really helpful, because I feel like I'm walking around blind as to what Utopia would really bring to the table here. And so just giving them that opportunity to give more information in an RFP would be so helpful.
So help me I'm not sure we're saying the same thing.
Okay, maybe not.
I'm not clear what it is that you want Utopia to provide that they haven't already provided.
Well, I think that looking at the interest rates that we have now, looking at the costs we have now, supply chain issues, et cetera. I mean, I don't know. Richard and Jesse could maybe speak to the bidding process. Like, but if we were to go to RFP now, and if we were to say we're looking to hire someone to do to provide fiber services for our city, and we are open to it being city-owned or provider-owned, what services can you give us, and how much would you charge? To me, it just seems like, especially with the changes, how things have evolved with costs, to just get the most updated, whatever people are willing to do, and then we could really just compare apples to apples and make a decision with that RFP.
So we already know what Utopia is going to charge.
Is that the 45 million?
So keep this in mind, that number has no bearing at all on what they're going to charge our residents. Zero. They're going to charge our residents the same amount they charge everybody else. Everybody on Utopia pays the same amount.
The $70?
Yes. So the cost they will neither reduce nor increase the cost to our residents based upon the cost of construction. We've already asked that, they've already answered that.
In your communication today, is that what you understand, Alan?
Yes. And they were also expressing interest. They would consider a city-owned Utopia network.
Mm-hmm.
I have a few questions from earlier that relate specifically to revenue, and I'm not even sure I'm going to ask the questions correctly, but hopefully you'll get the gist. So, the overriding question is, how and when in a city-owned plan do we end up making money? But then I have a lot of little sub things that that's just the kindergarten question. And then, what is our cost and revenue structure for this? And how do we do it? If we are going to be in a competitive marketplace, and with the city-owned model, I'm concerned about a Pandora's box of potentially creating a whole new department, and how do we account for new technologies and developments and bringing all of that on when a provider, a non-city provider, they are doing this all the time, and this is, they are paying off their bonds, and the take rates are high. I'm just concerned about unintended consequences and offsets to revenue, and when does that revenue stream, when is that anticipated that a city-owned revenue stream would start coming in, and what that would look like?
the revenue stream could start within 6-8 months. I think he said a year would be the first time that they would have some billing, some actual installations. But we're going to
But
be
I
a
guess-
negative cash flow
Yeah.
for several years, probably 2 or
That's
3
what I
years. I can't
mean.
remember how many years before the income based on the monthly charges starts servicing the debt. And at that point, we're a little bit behind, and then by the time we get to the end of the bond length, and then it'll just,
So I guess, and that is what I meant, the cost revenue intersection, and at what point do we then just realize, along the same lines as our publicly owned utility, the power company, just kind of that steady revenue stream while we're still able to, exist in a competitive marketplace, and because that's required by the legislature, and that we then, do we have any modeling on that? Like, is that 30 years? Is that, it's when the bond expires, and how, is that what we anticipate? And
yeah,
on these
it's
figures,
the
was
debt
it like
length.
3 million or?
It's the debt length, the debt length. So 30, 25, 30 years.
And then at that point, we would, it's
At that point, we would own it, and then we'd still be charging a certain amount every month for users to replace and upgrade the equipment.
That presentation, I don't know if we have John's presentation, that shows that for the monthly charge, a percentage of it is reserved for the city's debt service and replacement, and a portion of it goes to pay for the operations of the system. And you can use, and I believe it was $37 for the debt service and capital replacement, $20 goes to the operations, a portion of which also goes to the ISP and operations, if I'm remembering right. I just can't remember the chart. So the idea is that over the course of 30 years, that $37 is going into the debt service and replacement. $20 is paying for the annual operations and costs, as well as the ISP charge, and that if there's and then there's 2% increase as they recommend, or whatever we feel is necessary. If the city operated the system by ourselves, that $20 would come directly to us. If we contract with a service provider, whether that be Utopia or Strata or somebody else, that $20 goes to them to maintain the system, to do the advertising, to do the marketing, to do the maintenance, the customer service, all of that.
So to have the system operated by the city, certainly that would envision the creation of a whole new department, and
Right.
would be very employee heavy, department heavy.
And that's not our recommendation. Lehigh looked at that model. That's what they wanted to do initially, was create a fiber department, basically. And what they found was they could not find the expertise and they couldn't afford somebody to come in and do that. So they ended up partnering with an existing provider, Strata, to do that. And that would be our recommendation as well, is that at least for a period of time, we do that. We would do that if we owned the infrastructure. We might end up doing it forever, but at some point we might have the expertise in-house where we could do it. But it wouldn't be our recommendation that we create a new department to do the operations and marketing and everything else.
So I have a suggestion followed by a potential motion from my colleagues. Since we cannot take a motion on this topic, since it was not agended for a motion, and we're now just in a continuation of the work session, it feels like we still have some more questions that we may not have the right data or people or numbers at hand to answer. So this is going to be my suggestion that we book on the council meeting we have scheduled for the 28th, another work session on this agenda, that we perhaps all make lists of additional questions that we would like to have answered for that meeting, so that we can be prepared and ready and engaged. Because then the next motion I would make would be probably a motion to adjourn, since we've had a long meeting thus far.
I like that. Can I just ask 2 questions before that?
Please.
What's the time frame? If we decided to go with Utopia today, when would we start construction? And if we decided to do it ourselves, what's that time frame? What's the difference between those 2 time frames?
They're frankly, I mean, so I'm looking at Alan because he's seen the most recent information from Utopia. They would be relatively similar. We know that engineering and design is going to take 6 months. That's probably not that different for Utopia in particular, because they have other projects in the works as well. We also would have to put our financing together, do the bonding and things like that. That could be done, as John Honkard mentioned tonight, probably when we get to about the 60% design level. So we're talking about beginning, if it's us, we're talking about having all of those pieces in place probably end of the year, beginning of next calendar year. Best case scenario. From the email we received from Utopia, and based on what the other work they have going on, it would probably be about the same time frame that we would hopefully see any construction happening, would be the beginning of the calendar year. Alan,
Yeah, I think they've expressed that as soon as we were to sign a contract with them, they would order the material immediately, and that they would start the design process immediately, and within 4 to 6 months, they could be starting the installation.
4 to 6 months from the time we say go?
Yeah.
And thinking of like our RFP, we've got to go to RFP for the design. We've got to select that contractor. John also mentioned that we need a business plan to know how we bill and charge and what that financial looks like. Then we've got to select that consultant. We've got to then acquire the material. Well, we've got to then go to RFP again for a contractor to do the work. Then they procure the material, and then they can start. It seems like there's a big difference in time frame to me in thinking of that. And then my other question was, where does the city, so in both scenarios, there's an ISP, and that ISP is probably going to be very similar between both models. Is that true?
Well, multiple ISPs.
That's right. Like the Utopia, there's like 10 or 12 or something. There's a lot. It would be very similar if we did it, I'd imagine. Maybe fewer.
So let's talk about what we would probably do. We would probably contract with a company that would do that, right? So the only other firm that has really expressed interest in doing this is Strata. So let's just put a name out there. Strata would do the same thing. They would do the marketing and bring on the multiple ISPs. So.
Didn't Alan just say, though, that Utopia also indicated today that they would be interested in being the ISP?
No,
Oh,
they
no.
would be interested in participating in a city-owned project if we bonded for the whole project and paid for the whole project, as opposed to them bonding and us just doing a backstop or a pledge bond.
Okay, so they would,
Yeah.
but they would not do what Gary is just suggesting, Strata. They would not.
They would do the marketing, and they would do all the operations.
So they did say that if the city owned the network, that they would be the network system operator.
Yes, it would be a city-owned
Okay, so they
provider
would,
operated.
so.
So Alan, when did that
they would
conversation take place?
They're also willing to do
Was-
that.
That was quite some time ago. They said that they would be willing, they would consider talking about it. I don't think they didn't give us a proposal that way.
So I guess my question, so both scenarios have an ISP. That's where it sounds like the biggest lump sum monthly cost would go to the homeowner or the subscriber, be the ISP, it sounds like?
The biggest lump cost goes to the debt service, goes to the payment of the bonds. That's the $37.
Okay, but if it was Utopia, we wouldn't have that.
Yes, they would have that. It just wouldn't come to us. It would still go to Utopia to pay their debt service.
And that's in that $70.
Yes.
And then there's the ISP, and then that's what I would potentially choose as a homeowner of the 12 options, depending on the model I want, the speed I want, and the data.
Well, it's also, the ISPs are different prices, so like that $70 you saw from Utopia, that's if you pick one ISP. The others cost different.
Correct.
Every ISP is a different
Correct.
amount.
Second.
Okay, catch me up, Richard.
What?
That was on the motion to end the
Oh,
meeting.
Kate made a motion. I was just
Okay,
seconding.
Kate made a motion to adjourn, right?
I did.
Okay, so I don't think we're done with the discussion. Is there?
That was my question, thanks.
Okay, any other discussion that anyone else has? The motion is, and there's not a motion, we're not voting tonight on this, so obviously this discussion will continue. And
Yes.
There was a semi-motion. The semi-motion before the motion to adjourn was to agenda this for a work session on June 28th.
June 28th, thank you. That's right,
So the-
okay.
The council would know to have questions ready to be asked or schedule individual meetings to ask questions, and then the public would also be able to use the intervening time to digest the report and give us
Okay.
feedback,
So,
followed by a motion to adjourn.
So I'm sure that some people who might be listening might be frustrated, but we can't vote, we can't make a decision tonight anyway because it was a work session item, not an item to be voted on. So we will be continuing this discussion June 28th, and we will be, the council members between now and then should do all we can to be prepared so that when we come on that night, we're closer to being able to make a final decision. And, yes, please.
Sorry, just further discussion. I'm sorry, everybody, but could we get more information, Alan, specifically on Utopia? Could we reach out to Utopia again and find out their current status or thoughts on what them being the ISP would look like, and also their modeling based on aerial pricing?
So they're never an ISP. Utopia may operate the system, but that's a different animal than being the internet service provider. They would hire or they would facilitate internet service providers to come in under their management, but they're never the ISP.
Okay, could
We
we just
can
get
get
that
more-
information?
We can get more information from them.
I'd like, at the same time, if you could ask them about the smart city options and what that cost would be to the city for city services to link in to.
Excellent.
Good call.
Thank you. Okay, Alan, do you have any last thoughts or? Okay,
No?
all right, Gary? Okay, council?
Thanks, everyone, for sticking around. It was good to get more questions answered.
Indeed, thank you. Okay, well, the motion's been made and seconded, and all in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.